Hello and welcome to the Franz Van Cat interview. I'm Annette Young. On Monday, Israelis and Palestinians will return to the negotiating table for the second round of rare face-to-face talks. Yet so incredibly low are the expectations that the mere fact that they're sitting together in the same room has been trumpeted as a major achievement. Now, one man who knows this process incredibly well is the former advisor on the Middle East and the Persian Gulf to President Barack Obama. I'm talking about, of course, Dennis Ross, and he joins me now from Washington, D.C. Dennis Ross, thank you so much for giving us some of your time.
Happy to be with you. Thank you.
First of all, before we get to the Middle East, the story that is making the headlines at the moment, of course, is Iran. And do you think that Tehran is actually going to follow through on its threats and actually close off the Straits of Hamas?
No, I do not. Were they to do that, they would be the ones who would suffer more than anyone else. Number one. Number two, they know they would be inviting a confrontation with us and the world, but specifically a confrontation with us, and the confrontation with us is something they can ill afford. I do think there's a lot of bluster because I think they're being hurt. They feel the pain of the sanctions right now. They know the sanctions are going to increase. I think this is an effort at trying to somehow intimidate on the outside, and maybe even given the internal pressures on the inside and the competition in advance of the coming elections in March, this may also be designed to be geared towards some of the internal audiences as well, but I think it has much more bluster than reality to it.
Now, of course, we're in the beginning of a presidential campaign, and the Republicans have accused President Obama of being weak on Iran. Now, if you were still advising him today, what would you be telling him?
Well, I think the essence of what we're doing is the right thing. I don't think it's fair at all. In fact, I think it's quite wrong to say that the president's been weak on Iran. Iran, for the first time, is suffering profound, I think, pain, and they're seeing that the consequences of the sanctions are not symbolic. They're quite real and quite practical. So the kind of pressure the Iranians are under is pressure that they really have not experienced before, and that I think is largely a function of the efforts that the president has been making. So I think the path he is on is the right one. The key has always been to put the Iranians in a position where they realize they have to make a choice. There is no way out of making a choice. And the consequences for not making a choice to, in fact, alter their approach in their nuclear program is to endure pain and to endure a price that is a price they simply don't want to endure. So I think the basic approach is the right approach. The question is, will the Iranians seek a way out? Because ultimately that still is what matters.
And it seems to be that Tehran is absolutely determined to pursue this controversial nuclear program, come what may. At some point, do you see eventually military action being seriously considered?
Well, I think the key is, what is it that they want? If they want civil nuclear power as a symbol of national achievement, then that's something that's possible. What they can have is civil nuclear power. What they cannot have are nuclear weapons or a nuclear weapons capability. And I believe that, in fact, if you look at the history of their behavior, when they come under significant pressure, they do look for a way out. They do look to adjust their behavior. Here they have a chance to find a way out, which leaves them with civil nuclear power. If they're determined to have nuclear weapons, then I think you're going to find that the price to them and the consequences for them are going to go up. Rather than making them secure, it'll make them quite insecure.
Now, you stepped down from the job in November 2011, just a couple of months ago. Why did you resign?
Well, I left because I had made a promise to my wife that when I went back in, I would stay for only 2 years. I know that Washington is the kind of town where people never feel that these kinds of explanations are the real explanations, but I can tell you it's the real explanation. I ended up staying almost a third year. And these kinds of jobs take a heavy toll. I've done it well and for a long period of time before. So 3 years was a long time, and I felt it was time to fulfill the commitment that I'd made to my wife, and I did.
Now, during your time in the job, the Palestinians said you were way too close to Israeli officials and as a result were not an honest broker. How do you respond to those allegations?
Well, I think it's always convenient to try to suggest that someone is or isn't an honest broker. The fact of the matter is, what matters is, are you an effective broker? And the key here is, what can we or others do to change the circumstances, to overcome an impasse, find a way forward. You know, we're looking at a Middle East right now that is characterized much more by change than by anything else. The focus in the area is actually on transformation of the region as a whole, of countries. The focus is less on this issue, but that doesn't make this issue any less important. So I think the challenge right now is, again, when it comes to the Israelis and Palestinians in particular, how do you find a way forward? How do you find a way that allows both sides to address what's important to them? Israelis will always be preoccupied with security for very good reasons. Palestinians are preoccupied with achieving a state that is genuinely independent. I have believed for a long time that it's possible to reconcile those two goals, security for the Israelis, independence for the Palestinians. And frequently there is a tendency to get, I think, focused on the narratives and the arguments rather than how you solve problems and how you overcome the differences. And I think trying to get, again, a focus on how to overcome differences, how to try to change the realities on the ground, this is what's important at this stage.
There's also been reports of serious tensions between yourself and the then US Middle East Special Envoy, Senator George Mitchell, that was caused, at least in part, by your occasional efforts to conduct negotiations directly with officials from the Israeli side without even notifying the senator. Was that the case?
That's just untrue. I mean, again, I know there are lots of conventional wisdoms, and I know there's lots of conspiracy theories that people tend to generate, but that's simply untrue.
Okay, well, the Palestinians say that they won't start true negotiations until the Israelis halt settlement building. Was it a mistake, in retrospect, for President Obama to insist on a settlement freeze?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to look forward and not backward. I mean, the fact is, we are where we are at this stage, and the question is, what is going to change the situation? Palestinians are not served by a stalemate. Israelis are not served by a stalemate. The question is, how do you change that? Right now, there are efforts being made, and as you noted in introducing the program, that there'll be another meeting on Monday. It's good, it's important that there are meetings taking place, because absent meetings, you're not going to make progress. So I think, how do you find ways in those meetings to make progress? How can you punctuate what you do between the two sides as they get together? How do you punctuate that by creating an atmosphere that gives them each a level of hope that, in fact, the other will be responsive to what's important to them? Can you change realities on the ground in a way that serves both sides' interests? These are the issues that I think need to be looked at now, and there needs to be, I think, a lot of energy given to this.
But Dennis Ross, there seems to be absolutely no daylight at the moment. On the one side, the Palestinians are refusing to talk, and then you have the Israelis who say that they won't talk to a Palestinian government that includes Hamas. How do you resolve the Hamas factor?
Well, it's not a simple thing to resolve. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if Hamas refuses to recognize Israel or to renounce violence or to accept the previous agreements, it's pretty hard to find a basis on which to be dealing with them. By the same token, you have a Palestinian Authority that is committed to those principles. They are talking about reconciliation with Hamas, but in fact that hasn't been translated into something that is real. I think at this stage, when you have meetings again, at least resuming, even if they're preparatory meetings, even if they're not billed as formal negotiations, you think about how you use those discussions to make some progress between the two sides. Maybe you think about creating packages between the two sides that address some of the concerns each has.
Do you still believe...
One of the problems you've had is a lack of communication between the two sides in a way that we really haven't seen in the past. So how do you, when you resume this kind of communication, how can you have something result from it that each side can point to, so that they begin to create a certain greater momentum and they begin to create a certain greater confidence in each other?
But how long can this current stalemate continue? I mean, it could go on indefinitely.
Well, I think if it goes on indefinitely, it basically cements a view on each side that, in fact, peace isn't possible. I think that's the last thing that either side should want. I've often said, you have two national movements competing for the same space. You have two peoples with very distinctive identities. The reality is neither one of them is going to go away. They're going to have to find a way to live together. They're going to have to find a way to coexist. The only way to do that is in a solution that provides for two states for two peoples. There isn't an alternative. If one despairs, you don't change that reality. You make it harder to achieve that reality, but it doesn't change a circumstance where, since neither side can deny the other or wish the other away, they're going to have to come up with a means for living together, and there's one outcome that makes that possible. Hamas rejects that outcome. Hamas, I think, has to adjust to the reality as well.
So where do you see Israel in 10 years' time then?
Well, I'm hoping that in 10 years' time we'll have, or less than that to be sure, an outcome where we have two states for two peoples. No one is going to benefit more from two states for two peoples than the Palestinians, but the Israelis will also benefit. I mean, these are incredibly productive people. These are incredibly energetic people. These are people, if you look, who are successful in what they do. They can be more successful if, in fact, they're coexisting in peace and security together.
Thank you so much for being with us, and that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kapt interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly.